Well,
Now
there are no
you have to just
coincidences. Not at all.
got to bow to the facts, spirit influence, no question about it.
Oh,
So
totally.
that's what started the whole thing. And then I realized the world of wonders. As time moved on, I realized that it was pretty much within the boundaries of a century, a little more than a century, 1848, the advent of the Fox sisters in Hydesville, which is only an hour from my house. Then to around 1960, I'd say 1848 to 1960 would be the century of wonders.
Yes.
Of course, this does not include the indigenous cultures thousands of years prior to that. I mean modern spiritualism, which would mean the Fox sisters at Hydesville onward. So the deeper I went into the research, the more books. And back in the 80s and early 90s, there was plentiful old bookstores before the internet ruined all that. You know, you would have all these wonderful, used, rare bookstores. So always a section of the occult. And I found numerous books, rare books on spiritualism that you can't find now. You can find them on the internet, very expensive. And there's reprints, but it was so much fun. I wouldn't take anything back because the old-fashioned way of finding books is, to me, the only way. You know, the musty smelling, sequestered nooks of the old book guy, the old guy with his cardigan and sweater on, and the classical music playing in the background. You know, you can't beat it. The musty smell, it's like, oh, the old bookstores they're rare, but they're still out there. So I just kept going and going and going. And now here we are 30 years later with my 9th book about to be published. And there's just loads of information on all these books. So what my claim is that books and what the great mediums have done have proved 10,000 times over the proof of life after death and spirit return. It's already been done.
Oh, I feel the same way, Riley. That's how I first convinced myself about life after death was in the 60s. I frequented old bookstores and also libraries. Sometimes I was able to buy the book that was in the library. They didn't even want it. No, you're right. We were lucky to be able to be out doing that stuff back when you could get those books almost for free. No, it was wonderful.
Some of them I found were even signed by the authors.
Oh, well, I don't know that I have. I'm not sure I have any signed ones. But yeah, you could get those books very inexpensively. Nobody wanted them.
I mean, signed by the mediums.
Signed by the mediums.
I have.
I don't think I have any of those. No.
I have Man's Survival After Death by Charles Tweedale, 1904, and
oh my goodness,
signed Etta Wright, one of the greatest direct voice mediums of all time.
Oh wow!
Who it turns out, here's another gem of research. She was born in my hometown, Etta Wright, and of all things, I have her book. You know, it's like, oh my goodness.
Look at you.
But you know what? What I say is, in modern days here, with electronic devices and people trying to communicate with the afterlife, let us not forget the great archives of what has already happened, because you're open-minded. Your chances are you're not going to find a medium in these modern times. It's just getting rarer and rarer.
No.
And I mean, truly great interventional mediums are 1 in 10 million, if you're lucky. Not compared to the heyday of spiritualism, when there was a medium almost in every family.
Oh, right,
but
right.
If you look into the archives of what has taken place, especially the teachings, there is no doubt, if you weigh all the evidence, there is the proof you're looking for as far as death. If you believe the written word, you cannot get around these facts. And so I say that the facts of life after death, spirit return, have been proved 10,000 times over or more. You can find these truths. You get on with your life. You know, our society needs it, because if our society truly knew spiritual truth, things wouldn't be so twisted as they are right now. You know, the hatred and shootings and things just seem out of whack now. And I think that the spiritual truth could save a lot of people's minds. Don't you agree?
You're absolutely right. And fear of death is the base fear. And we have allowed fear to so overwhelm our culture. And this is worldwide. It isn't just in the United States or even in just the Western countries. It's worldwide. And once we can get past the fear of death and people truly start thinking on an eternal frame, it's going to change everything about the way we live, work, think, and are. And so that's what you're working on. We have the same job, you and I.
Yep.
Precisely.
If any of these, let's just say as an example, these corrupt people in power, if no matter what side of the fence they're on, they knew.
You're right. It doesn't matter.
They're
exactly.
doing to their own destiny. They would never do what they're doing. Everybody has this this blind belief in some savior. It doesn't exist. It's really sad for me to see. I mean, to each his own. I'm not going to pass judgment on someone what beliefs they follow, but this whole concept with Christianity of fear and damnation, it's like, whatever made someone think that they're not good enough just as they are? How about that? Every person's a gem in the universe. There's no one's committed any sins. No one's going to be condemned. There's no savior. There's no gods. You have yourself, and you've done nothing wrong. You know what I'm saying? All these people think they've sinned and they've done these terrible things and they're born in sin. It's like, oh, it's so false. It's not true. The universe is far more wonderful than that.
And actually, Jesus doesn't. He came to abolish. I'm going to say something which is true, and it's actually in the Gospels, but they ignore the Gospels. Jesus came to abolish the concept of sin. But the Romans didn't like that idea, so they were the ones who established the concept of sin. That's our next website after Seek Reality Online.
Whether Jesus was real or a mythological hybrid, the basic teachings of what was said, a 5-year-old could understand. Basic, simple love your neighbor, treat them like you would treat yourself. Be courageous and true to yourself. Stand up for yourself. Always live the truth. I don't know what could be more confusing to anybody else besides those basic truths.
Well, they ignore him anyway. I mean, they just treat him like a sacrifice. That's not who Jesus was. Jesus was real. I think the Shroud of Turin proves he was real, but they don't care what he said. They just want him to be a sacrifice. I mean, you and I could talk about that, and I could tell you a lot of things which I think would surprise you about Jesus. But the point is, Christianity is not based in Jesus or in his teachings. Christianity is based in what the Romans taught 300 years after his death. But let's talk about what you learned about death and what you learned about the fact that death doesn't exist is actually something which it's a terrible illusion, actually. I mean, we see the body die and we think the person died, but the person didn't die at all. And that's what you learned from these mediums. I mean, you preserved some evidence which was so essential, and you preserved it just in time. Because if you hadn't found those books, and if you hadn't used what was in those books to write the books you wrote, and those books that you wrote are a treasure trove. I've read most of your older books. I haven't read the most recent ones because I've been so busy, but I've read the older ones. And I mean, the book about Mrs. French and the other books, so essential. Because the evidence they produced was amazing, and it couldn't be duplicated today because people don't have the ability anymore to develop the talents those people had.
Now, I've watched it carefully, and it takes years. It just takes, if you study any subject for 30 years, you're going to see patterns, and you start to see the whole complete story. And with the 19th century came materialism, and then the distractions started happening, and then the false mediums, and then the spiritualism haters and prejudice. And then as time marches on, you have now the cell phone towers and social media. And now it's almost dangerous to be a medium right now because people have cell phones in their pockets. And the spirits, see, they knew this. They knew 150 years ago or whatever, they knew this was coming. See, so they smartly said, we're going to open up the floodgates of spiritual events like the world has never seen before. And they did. They opened up the gates, and it started to fade around 1970, 1965, right around there, even though two of the great mediums, Leslie Flint and David LeBaron, they were the last two great independent voice and materialization mediums. Were those two. And then you can see now the state of affairs,
It's not possible for people to develop these skills anymore, partly because of, frankly, electric lights. People can't sit in the dark and develop those skills. Craig Hogan has, for the past 15 years or so, been he's had a development circle going, which is actually quite promising. But for 15 years, people have been sitting in the dark in his development circle. Only now are they beginning to get ectoplasm, for example. I mean, these people have that. It's taken that long for them to even get to that basic level. That's how hard it is. Nobody has that kind of patience anymore.
And there's no guarantee of what's happening. Times have changed. The whole thing is not what it used to be. Spiritualism was something that happened, like the Beatles.
Like the Beatles, right?
The Beatles came and went, but their music lives on forever.
Yeah.
Through generations, the Beatles live on.
Yeah.
Spiritualism came and went, and its teachings that live on. And then that's how I see it. It'd be like doing research on the Beatles. I mean, you're archiving spiritualism because it came and went, and its teachings are right there. The whole thing is right there, and that's why I feel compelled to just keep going with it, so that whoever gets to it, they'll be transformed. And I couldn't say it enough, that what people have told me in the Zoom meetings from all over the world, how they never knew these things took place.
That's right.
And when they found out it did, it transformed their entire way of thinking.
Oh, I'm so glad they believe it still. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I've heard it from people from all over the world. It's just so nice to hear. I had never done Zoom meetings before. I'm not a geek by any stretch. So it was quite a thing for me.
Are you sure?
I never realized how many people were aware of my work. So it was so fulfilling to hear people from everywhere say they never knew who Emily French was, or they never knew who the Davenport brothers or the Dying Sisters or Realization or anything. And I can tell you, what I should tell you about is the newest one coming out, Spectral Evidence 3. It is packed with wonders. Have my word. One of which is one of the most outstanding moments I consider in our history. The day after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, British medium Emma Harding Britton, famous trance medium, approached and said, this is with 1 day's notice. Would you give the funeral oration for Abraham Lincoln? He says, without any hesitation, he said, let's do it.
Wow.
So in this book, I had to edit the size of it because it would have taken up an entire chapter and probably tired the readers. But what greater moment can there be than that, as far as a stamp of approval for spiritualism?
Wow.
The 42-year-old woman, 42 with not less than a day notice, no preparation, nothing. Stand up at the Cooper Institute in New York City in front of 3,000 people and give an address of such power and beauty, unlike anything I think ever recorded in spiritualism. This one, and she must have spoke for an hour and 45 minutes. In trance, no less.
Oh, my goodness.
For Abraham Lincoln's funeral, I mean, that is a giant moment in spiritualism.
Wow.
There's also a section in the book on, speaking of Abraham Lincoln, he actually held seances in the White House.
Yes.
With the young medium Nettie Colburn